everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I want to talk about a troubling trend that I have noticed. So troubling, I'm making a video about it. One that I didn't particularly want to make, or I should say in the past have avoided directly making, but the uptick I have seen in predatory and scammy behavior that I believe is taking advantage of aspiring writers feels like it is demonstrably on the rise in a post-COVID, still miring through the pandemic environment. And I want to warn you guys. I of course have talked about scammy things to look out for, particularly in traditional publishing before, but I've always tried to be rather affirmative about it, giving you as many tools as humanly possible so that you can kind of go forward with best practices and best mindset for pursuing publishing. But this is a case where I think I need to be a little bit more direct and just warn you of some of the trends that I have been seeing as briefly as is possible for me, so that you can protect yourself. So what is happening? Why? What's changed? I think it's a number of market factors and worldwide factors. And specifically in a lot of the publishing environments where I am, places like Reddit, but also private channels with fellow authors, advising mentees through author mentor match, and what I do catch of Twitter. I have been trying to Twitter detox myself, but a couple things have happened that are so big that they have spilled into other places. And I mean, you may have also seen some of the things that I have seen recently, but I've seen multiple troubling trends that impact both people pursuing traditional publishing as well on the indie self-publishing side. So I think it's a number of factors. The biggest one, frankly, is all of this is essentially post-2020. 2020 has created a lot of these conditions that have led to this sharp rise that I am seeing. We're going through something worldwide. A lot of people stuck at home, a lot of people reevaluating their personal and professional lives. In fact, because of that, we're seeing, or I've seen, a rise also in agents and editors leaving the business because in their reassessment of their priorities, they've decided not to do this thing. But just as many, if not more people, decided in the course of 2020 into 2021, few things. Now is the time to write my novel. Yes, great, write your novel. Now is the time to become an agent regardless of whether or not I am qualified. Now is the time to start a publisher regardless of whether or not I'm qualified. Now is the time to take advantage of all of these people who are flooding into the novel market, who are writing novels for the first time, or who are encountering a more difficult publishing market, and take their money. Combination of those things. Disclaimer as always, some people are straight up setting out to scam other people, but just as insidious, and the ones that I find are almost more important to warn against, are the well-meaning people who simply don't have the experience or qualifications to do what they say they can do, and they can end up wasting people's time or sometimes taking a lot of money from them and harming their writing career. So briefly about those market conditions, I've spoken about them in previous videos because we all know that I am the crusher of dreams, the bearer of bad news. But we continue to see essentially responses to market saturation, especially in the kidlit space, specifically in YA. Adult impacted as well, but in different ways. But generally speaking, we're seeing austerity measures happening across publishing. Everything is slower. Many editors and imprints are purchasing less. In some cases, budgets are shrinking. Generally speaking, there's a huge rise in burnout among publishing professionals. As I said, some people are leaving their positions as they've reevaluated their priorities. And in many cases, start laughing so you don't cry, publishers are literally not replacing those people. So more work is just dumped on top of the people who remain. So it's this stressful thing. Agents, also overwhelmed. A lot of people taking on fewer clients. A lot of existing authors in the pipeline encountering more challenges to continue to be published. And you're hyperventilating now, and I completely understand that. But here's the flip of that. We're more stressed than ever. People are more worried than ever because we all have these dreams and these aspirations to be a writer, to be published, to pursue our dreams. And I don't want people to stop dreaming. In fact, don't stop dreaming. I've said it a million times, and the difference between making it and not making it. You can't give up. but you may be more of a target for people who are going to capitalize on your hopes and dreams, especially in the face of rising market challenges, to try to offer you services that may be bad for you, may be scammy. As I said, tons of people were like, hey, what better time to become a literary agent, regardless of whether or not they are qualified. So that is the first thing I want to talk about. The rise in shady or scammy or flat out bad / inexperienced agents. I've seen a massive uptick in it. And of course, the instinct as a writer, as you see some of the more experienced agents who are overwhelmed by the pandemic, who are closing to queries and like paring down their client list, is, oh, you want to go for new agents. There are actually two sides to this. We've seen some positive trends in the area of new agent opportunities, but it is more important than ever to be really thoughtful and smart about your research into agents, properly vetting agents, understanding what good qualifications are so that you don't fall into a bad situation. So on the one hand, as heartened as I have been to see, about time, all these agencies understanding that you can do remote work, that you can facilitate remote agents. A lot of agencies took on fresh new talent, especially in 2020, going into 2021. And we're seeing some fantastic new agents coming up through the industry under proper mentorship and guidance at good agencies, especially as those experienced and established agents are closing to queries, paring down their client list, just taking on fewer people. So we're seeing some good kind of refreshing of the pipeline on the better side of traditional publishing. But more than ever, 2020 to now, it's overwhelming how many new agencies and new agents we've seen crop up. People who don't appear to have much, if any, real industry experience, but who are calling themselves agents who are taking queries. Hundreds of writers are querying them, and many of them are, exhibiting just serious red flag behavior. We've seen multiple agents sign 20, 30 clients in a really short space of time. I've heard many whispers, and we've also seen publicly people who have sadly said, oh, I signed with an agent and then they ghosted me for 6 months, and like stuff that just is not okay. So in a time when submission is super congested, editors are behind, they're purchasing less, submissions taking longer and longer, even for really seasoned agents and great authors, we have this huge flood of unqualified agents signing a ton of people, getting their hopes up, and clogging the pipeline further. Plus, we've actually seen some legitimate spectacular meltdowns and scandals. Like, you may have also noticed, we've had a couple things crop up where we've heard of egregious behavior from someone new at a not particularly great agency doing some really unprofessional actions. So I'm just telling you generally, I have seen a huge rise in it. It is more important than ever to really be thoughtful. Know that wanting to be an agent, loving books, being editorial, that isn't enough to be a qualified agent. Even I've seen some cases where, you're gonna hear me repeat this about freelance editors in a little bit, but having a degree in a related writing field doesn't confer automatic enough or qualified experience to be an industry professional. A lot of people have degrees in English. A lot of people have MFAs, but you always have to ask yourself the question, what relevant industry experience do they have? Because agenting is all about contacts. The good thing is, as an author, we don't have to know anyone or have any connections to get a book published. I know a lot of people don't believe us, because in a lot of industries it's not like that. But on the author level, we can cold query, and we don't have to know anyone. We just have to have a good book. Agents, however, the opposite. Agents can only be good at their jobs if they have networking connections. So making sure that an agent has that experience and those connections is super critical. Because in a time where there's more and more noise and literally anyone can call them a literary agent, and I've just seen a lot of that happening, editors probably aren't even going to look at those submissions, especially when they're overwhelmed. And so you are throwing away your book and potentially stalling or throwing away at least the start of your career by signing with these agents. It is much better to have no agent than to sign with a bad agent. So I'm warning you, I've seen a massive spike in this activity in the last 2 years. Similarly, the next trend I've seen a huge spike in, and it was this one combined with the agent one where I went, I need to make this video. I've come across this a ton on Reddit because people will post threads and ask for advice. Oh, I have this publishing offer. And I gotta tell ya, 9 times out of 10, and we're seeing dozens of them a week, these are scams. Huge uptick in these, but the new twist to the scam is the rise in hybrid publishers. That's going in quotations. Let me say this up front. Hybrid publishing is a thing. Hybrid publishing is legitimate, can be legitimate, where you self-publish as well as traditional publish. You might self-publish some titles and then seek out a large traditional publisher or a small traditional publisher to publish other titles. It could be about having your subright shopped as an indie author by an agent to be traditionally published. Hybrid publishing is legitimate. What is far less legitimate is 95% of the publishers I've seen call themselves hybrid. It's this new trick, this new cheat that they're doing because they've been called out enough, some of them, though some of them still do this, for calling themselves traditional publishers and then asking for $5,000 to publish or minimum number of copies the author has to purchase. That is not traditional publishing. So now they're calling themselves hybrid publishers. And what's super predatory about it is a lot of them have very shiny, splashy web pages. They talk a lot of BS. I saw one particular one, someone asked for advice on Reddit and they actually posted everything this publisher said that they would do. And I broke it down almost point by point. I was like, what does that mean? That's vague. They can't promise that. Where's the evidence? And it's easy for me to dissect these things because of course I'm a bit more familiar with it, but I'm really, really concerned with the rise of how often these publishers are hoodwinking writers. There's a very important distinction between two things that I want to talk a little bit about. Legitimate, small, traditional publishers that sometimes are called indie publishers, meaning they're sometimes called independent publishers because they are independent from a major or a big 5 publisher. And those have always been there and those have always been legit. They have small distribution networks, but they are legitimate traditional publishers in that they follow the traditional model. They pay advances, or in some cases where they don't pay advances, they pay higher royalty rates. Very, very important. I've seen 1 or 2 that don't do an advance, but then they're still trying to pay you 10%, and it's like, no, anyway. Point is, but they have existing relationships and the ability to properly distribute particularly physical copies of your book, but there are a couple of them that do specialize in digital, but I do think that gets into a wibbly wobbly space. But the important thing is traditional. Money flows to the author. The second a publisher is asking you for money, a switch flips. Something is up. On the other end, there is something that is incredibly legitimate, but you have to go in knowing what it is, and it's what I call self-publishing services. These are some of them are pretty great, and I do have some recommendations, but I've seen a slight rise in these, and I'm actually pretty impressed with it. This is where an indie author, an author who is self-publishing, who understands what self-publishing is and understands the path that they want for themselves and their book, goes to a company that offers packaging services. It's an exchange of goods and services. They're not saying, we're a publisher, submit your manuscript and maybe we'll accept you. The indie author is able to go and like look at the packages, and often these will include cover design, editing, formatting. They might even do the publishing, like walk you through the actual publishing on different platforms, and some of them offer marketing services as well. I actually chatted a bit with Heartbreathing Sarah Cannon about this because I knew that this existed, but I would like to cross my T's and dot my I's before I open my mouth to speak about indie, because I am not an indie author or expert. And she agreed with me. She said, yeah, like 95% of hybrid publishers are really, really scammy. And 2 of the legitimate self-publishing services that she personally recommends are Publish and Book Baby. Services that are super above board about what they are. They're not pretending to publish you like a publisher, like a traditional publisher. They have services and packages that you pay for. They provide services to you, and you go in knowing what you were signing up for and what you were paying for. So that's the distinction I'd like to make. Legitimate, small, traditional, independent publishers versus self-publishing services. But then in the middle, we have the very, very scammy, and they call themselves a number of things. They'll call themselves traditional publishers, but then they ask you for money and no. They'll call themselves traditional publishers, but they have no distribution network or ability to distribute your book in any way that you couldn't do yourself as a self-publisher. I actually have seen a lot of publishers that are more like self-publishing services, just they don't style themselves that way, but they might be better served if they did, because they can offer a decent service to someone who wants to self-publish but is overwhelmed, but it's not the same as traditional publishing. And they'll call themselves hybrid as the new buzzword. It's BS, but ultimately what it boils down to, publishing companies, whether they solicit you or you submit to them and they accept your book and get your hopes up, and then you are paying for everything. It's good old-fashioned vanity publishing. It's important to know what it is and go in knowing what it is. Some people want to vanity publish their book, and there's nothing wrong with that. Those services exist for a reason. The problem is when they're scammy as heck and they obfuscate and lie and pretend with hopeful aspiring authors who just have a dream to be published. They're not upfront about things, and it's like, oh, we're accepting your manuscript, but they don't tell you that they accept 99% of manuscripts because here, give us $5,000 and we'll do the bare minimum for you. That's basically, you're better off self-publishing. You are better off doing your own research and piecemeal purchasing aspects of the process and or going with a self-publishing service than going with a vanity scam publisher. So I've seen a huge rise in these. They give themselves fancy publisher names and they make nice websites, and they offer a lot, or they seem to offer a lot, but the claims are vague. The promises are vague, and it's just, it doesn't pass the sniff test. But the important thing is to essentially understand what you want and what is out there. That the second any publisher is asking you for money, you need to ask yourself the hard question, am I better off self-publishing, and is that what I want? Because essentially, they're asking you for money, you might as well self-publish. What you really want is traditional publishing with all of the perks that come with that. There is an established system. It's just super important to understand what is and isn't the norm. Go in with your eyes open and don't get scammed. You should not have to pay thousands of dollars to a publisher to be published unless you want to do that and you are aware of the burdens that are going to lie on you as the author, when essentially that is akin to self-publishing, having a lot on your shoulders for the publishing experience. The last category I want to touch on briefly, which is kind of the trickiest to talk about, and that is that old chestnut freelance editorial services. If you're familiar with me in the channel, you know that I specialize in traditional publishing, and if you're traditionally publishing, I personally do not believe, let's say 99.9% of the time, that you need to pay for a freelance editor to look at your work. There are some situations where someone, well, let's say 98%, because there are some situations, which I am going to talk about, where you might want to pay for a freelance editor, but there's this misunderstanding that you have to, that it's some kind of requirement for being traditionally published when it is anything but. Typically, if you hear someone say that you have to, like you're required to, it's an industry norm to pay a freelance editor for traditional publishing before querying, before being published, they're probably a scammer themselves. They probably have a dog in the fight. They're probably trying to sell you their freelance editorial services, and if they're an agent in particular, run in the opposite direction. But I do like to disclaim there are some situations where someone pursuing traditional publishing might find it useful to pay for a qualified professional freelance editor, but I have to say some of the better cases I've seen are on the back end. Sometimes it does happen when you already have an agent or even already have a book deal, but it's a very personal thing and it's not normal, so I don't want to overly normalize it. And then another slice of it, why I back down to 98%, some writers do find it useful to pay for query or submission package services from qualified professionals. I'm gonna say qualified professionals repeatedly because that's the main thing, and some people find those really, really useful. It's not something I personally recommend or proselytize, but I do have personal friends who have paid for those services, reasonable prices from qualified professionals, say it again, and they have been very, very happy with what they have gotten. But The rise in scammy behavior. And again, this I think almost this entire category, unlike, you know, scam publishers, falls under people with very good intentions. And it's just when you have a huge shift and a lot of people lose their jobs or they're not able to go into the office, things have shifted in their professional life, people pursuing their dreams, just a lot of people turning to freelance or entrepreneurial work since 2020. It makes sense. So a ton more people are now offering freelance editorial services. And it's just important to know what the differences are between them and the kind of vetting that you want to do before you give someone money to edit your book. I also think it's important to bear in mind cost versus qualification. Like, the biggest red flag for me is someone who has basically no qualifications charging a butt ton of money. If you're gonna pay a butt ton of money for editing, if you want to pay for professional editing, like, make sure they have the qualifications to ask for that kind of money. So what kind of edits might you want to pay for? I think this is super important to know because I've just seen a lot of people get scammed in the sense of like they paid X amount of money and assumed they were getting one kind of edit, and then the person basically does a glorified copy edit, but not even a great copy edit. So you're like, copy edit, what? There are a couple different kinds of editing that you can pay for. One is a developmental edit. This is the kind of edit that you will get if you're doing traditional publishing and you sell to a publisher. The editor who buys your book does a developmental edit with you. They also do a line edit, which is a separate thing, but developmental edit is this umbrella that you'll see that you can definitely find freelance services for. This is big picture feedback, story, and sometimes craft-based feedback that you're going to get on your project. They're gonna read your whole book. Usually you'll get an edit letter. Some of them will go through the manuscript and do comments, but there are different styles, so I do recommend asking for a sample edit or getting more clarification on how they do their job. Because if a writer is expecting all of these inline comments, but they only get an edit letter, they might be disappointed. But I'll tell you, only getting an edit letter is pretty standard with developmental editing, because it's then on you as the writer to do the self-editing, taking their feedback into account. A developmental editor might comment on things like pacing, tension, character arcs, themes, in some cases specific setups or scenes, but yeah, then it's on you, the writer, to digest all of that feedback and edit the book. Developmental edits can be incredibly useful. I think developmental edits are some of the most valuable edits you can get on a manuscript, and that's when a qualified professional can truly take your book to the next level. It's something that I really like about traditional publishing. I have a professional at a major publishing house who pushes me and challenges me to elevate the story overall. I really enjoy that. So I therefore advise, when you are looking for a developmental editor, I think qualifications really matter here. I think it's important that they've worked at a major publisher for a number of years, that they worked at an agency, or, I mean, sometimes authors can be pretty good developmental editors, but you want to really look at what have they written and published? Who have they worked with? Like, what other books have they worked with developmentally? Like, really look at them and make sure that you like the stuff that they have worked on. Because here's the caveat about developmental editing and the rise in scammy-ish behavior. As I said, it's not directly scammy, but it's the anyone can call themselves a freelance editor syndrome, and that is, in some cases, what you would get from someone you pay to do a developmental edit is no better than what you would get from a free critique partner. So I encourage writers to be really wary of that. Exhaust all avenues possible for finding qualified free critique partners. And so that means you're finding fellow writers writing similar things, you're exchanging manuscripts with them, you're developing that critique partner relationship, and you do self-editing on that end. This is what I recommend for everyone doing traditional publishing, but I think it's really good for self-publishing as well. And a lot of indie authors do have these critique partners. They might call them betas, but in many cases they are critique partners. Essentially, because I believe good developmental editors are worth their weight in gold, I think it should be a pretty rare situation where you pay for a really good developmental edit, and I think it is a waste of money to pay for a glorified critique partner. That is my personal opinion. So the next thing, I'm gonna skip over line editing because the next big thing that really comes up and what people pay for with freelance editors is copy editing. So copy editing is like spelling, grammar, usage. Some copy edits will also do what functionally in traditional publishing is line editing. They will help you with word choice and some phrasing and whatnot, but like a good copy editor, like a qualified copy editor, they are amazing with the red pen, and they're gonna clean up your manuscript so you don't embarrass yourselves. And so again, a good copy editor is also worth their weight in gold. You want to look for qualifications. There are certificate programs and whatnot that copy editors can get. There are specific ways that you're supposed to copy edit. I would also definitely ask for a sample edit, because what you want to avoid, and this is where we see the rise, because I find most often, I mean, they're kind of equally as common, but people who are like, I have a degree in English and I need to make some cash, I'll call myself a freelance editor. And very often they either give you superficial critique partner-ish comments that you could get for free, or they do the lightest of copy editing, and it's like they put some commas in some places, and that's not really a proper or thorough copy edit. So ask for a sample edit, really look at how much someone is charging for their services, and look at who they've worked with, look at where they've worked, and you know, look at some of the final products of the books they have edited. That is really important. Like, look at those Kindle samples, or pick up the book in the bookstore if it's a case of that, because there are many freelance copy editors who also work for major publishers, and you can hire them for yourself as well. So just really be wary, because most often I see people who are disappointed, who are like, they read my book, they didn't deliver it on time, and they just inserted some commas in some places, and I feel like I got scammed out of my money. And that is something that you really want to avoid. And the last thing that I saw someone rant about this on Reddit, and it kind of made my head explode, because apparently this is a thing that people pay for in indie, which is fine, but this person was really upset about the fact that people, including in fanfic spaces and traditional publishing spaces, dare use the term beta reader when they don't mean someone that you pay to do a final read of your book. And I kind of scratched my head and went, you pay for that? And I guess so. You can pay for beta readers, and it's apparently a thing that a lot of people do in indie, but to me this comes back to the critique partner thing, because you can have critique partners who are essentially beta readers, where they don't do heavy critical reads of your book, but they read it for pacing, readability. I have beta readers who read my thrillers just to like tell me what they guessed when, and make sure that the pacing is working and the tension is working. And it was just a very interesting rant, because this person was like, it's only a beta reader if they're the last person who reads your book before you publish it and you pay them. And I was like, that's not my experience coming from fan fiction or critique partner realms and traditional publishing. I found that critique partner and beta can be interchangeable, but that is something to be aware of. But I personally would say, because again, I think that's probably one of the easier things to like throw up a shingle and say I'm a paid beta reader. Be careful of what you're paying for that. I wouldn't pay a lot of money for that, honestly, because that's something I can find for free. So that's just my personal opinion there. But yeah, so in the realm of this freelance editor thing, we've seen a massive uptick in it. And so it's just like with agents, it is more important than ever to really do your due diligence in looking at qualifications, read their bio, read the way they describe their experience. What I like on places like Readsy is they actually bullet point their experience, and you can see right there, oh, they freelance for Penguin Random House, or they freelance for this author that I really, really like, and like I know that their work is good. So it's really important to pay attention to what people's actual qualifications are, because I'm not knocking people who have English literature degrees. A lot of people have English literature degrees, and I'm one of those ones with a journalism degree. But neither of those degrees teach you grammar. Neither of those degrees qualify you to be a copy editor, because copy editor is actually a very specific job. It can contribute to someone's qualifications to be a good editor. But if all someone has is, I like to read and I have an English degree, to me that doesn't equal qualifications. You need to look at their work experience, need to look at their testimonials, make sure the testimonials aren't vague, like just some random name. For me, the best testimonials are from people's full names, so you can actually look up their books, so you can look at their books. The best testimonials, honestly, are from books you've heard of. And then liking them as a bonus. Really look at that kind of stuff. Look at where people have worked. And then the important thing is to consider cost. So it's really a sliding scale of what you can end up paying for editing. My thing, obviously I'm more conservative. I err on the side of I wouldn't pay for a freelance editor. I am not in need of that. If I were publishing indie, different situation. Thus for me, if I were in that situation, I would only go to the most qualified person, even if it meant booking them in advance and paying them a hefty chunk of change. That's me. But it is perfectly legitimate to decide you want to pay for an edit, but you can't afford a higher end edit, or you're not interested in that kind of edit. You just want a decently qualified edit. And so this is where I urge you to just pay attention to costs. Be very cognizant of cost versus qualification and experience. Be wary of both people who don't seem to have many qualifications but are charging a lot of money, but also people who charge little to nothing. Make sure they're not doing that because they're going to offer little to nothing. The good news is everyone does have to start somewhere, and it kind of becomes this thing where it's like, do I want to be the guinea pig of being one of the earlier clients for someone trying to establish themselves as a freelance editor? So you always just have to think about risk versus reward and be thoughtful about your budget and your needs. But I will just repeat again that if you're traditionally publishing, you really don't need to spend money on a freelance editor. Though, as I said, I do know some people who have had query package reviews and have been very, very happy with that. But I will close for the traditional publishing peeps to just remind you that there are a ton of really great free resources. You don't need to pay people for help with a ton of those things. For traditional publishing in particular, for query package review, for example, there are a lot of forums that you can go to, and one that I highly recommend is Pub Tips on Reddit. I'm pretty sure the query tracker forums are still chugging along. There are people who do critique partner exchanges and swaps through any community where you find writers, so Facebook groups and Twitter. But of course, this is also where you see a lot of kind of scammy people advertising their services. So now more than ever, what I want to leave you with this video is you have to be very, very protective of yourself, your writing, your career, and your resources, because we've seen a rise in just unfortunate scammy behavior. But I do want to emphasize, one of the reasons I haven't done a video like this before, but now I feel like I have to, is I never want to demonize people who are just trying to go out there and make a living. However, it's always it's that wibbly wobbly line of when one person's needs and wants potentially encroach on another person's rights to not be taken advantage of. That for me is this careful line. So it's just me warning you, giving you the tools to just kind of know what you want, be aware of some of the pitfalls that are out there, and make the best decisions you possibly can. It is 100% possible to get an agent, or to indie publish, or to small press publish, or to work with a freelance editor and not be taken advantage of. It's just a matter of being really, really careful. I will link down below to some resources, including Writer Beware, which remains a really fantastic resource, especially for being on top of scammy publishers. They often will do posts, but also if you're in a situation where you're concerned about something, you can reach out to them, and oftentimes they help people behind the scenes with potentially scammy or predatory publishing situations. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.